Welcome, everyone, to the afternoon session for TABE recertification. My name is Linda Keller. My current role that I work in is I work with Metro North Adult Basic Education as the accountability coordinator. I have been part of Adult Basic Ed for 29 years as a data entry staff, a support staff, resources and training for all things data and testing. And with the experience that I've had, our consortia is pretty large. So I've had, there's a lot of different programming that we've got. We've got programming in community colleges, technical colleges, co-located in a workforce center, couple corrections locations. We have some programming in a church. We have some rural and inner city programming, and we have online, in person, and high flex classes going on in our agency. So with attending today's session, it's designed to target people who have already been to a TABE implementation training here in Minnesota, and they either want to learn more information and are becoming seasoned testers, or you haven't been to a TABE training for at least 5 years. That's what the session is designed around. So if this is the right session for you, stay. Great. If you do stay, we need you to put your name in the chat. We need your first and last name, the agency that you're currently working with in Minnesota, and your role that you're working with within your agency. And then we also need your email address in order to verify that you were at today's training. So I'm going to turn my video off as to not be distracting, because there's a lot of slides that we're going to go through, and hopefully the information that I'm sharing today is going to be helpful. If you have any questions, if you're able to wait until the end or put them in the chat, and we'll download them, and I will get back to you because we've got 45 minutes to cover sessions, and I'm presenting at the next session also. So we're going to move on to the next slide, if it will advance for me. There we go. I do want to know, we like to know who's in today's session when we're presenting, so that we have a general idea who we're talking to. Are you support staff? Are you a teacher? Are you a program manager? Are you all of the above? Are you the volunteer coordinator? We like to know all that information so that we can help understand who's in the group with us. So if you could put that in the chat too. I'm going to be trying to monitor the chat here so that I know who's in here with us today. Today's objectives are that we're going to talk about the updated information regarding TABE 1112, because there's a lot of new information that has came out since it was originally NRS approved. We're going to review the best practices in administering the assessments, because they are standardized assessments. We're going to talk about, share, and discuss tools that can be used that TABE has developed for targeting instruction to encourage student learning and increase level gains. And then today's session will also help you meet the ABE every 5 years test administration recertification requirement from the Minnesota Department of Ed assessment policy. So there's links for today's session that if those could be shared in the chat, that would be awesome. Thank you, tech helpers. And today's PowerPoint and the materials that are included are also going to be included in the participants folder that can be found, that will be emailed out to everybody after today's session too. So let's talk about, why do we administer assessments in Minnesota ABE? Well, there's a lot of different reasons that we do. We do it because we want to obtain the basic information about where a student is with the basic functioning life skills that they have when they come to our door. There are locations in Adult Basic Ed across programming that we need to understand what's the best class placement for students. Assessment also helps guide teachers as to instructional needs that each student needs. And then we need to establish entry levels or a baseline for any post-testing that is going to be completed with students when the time comes and they've reached 40 hours. And then after post-testing is completed, the results that are done from the assessments will help teachers understand whether or not they need to alternate the instruction that they're delivering if a student doesn't completely grasp the content of what they had already been taught. And then, of course, accountability is key, because it is everyone's responsibility in Minnesota who's part of Adult Basic Ed and who's receiving funding to be testing individuals as they're enrolling into our program. So who can be delivering assessments? Any staff who's gone through a TABE implementation training here in Minnesota with a trainer, or staff who have completed the appropriate TABE certification training on the tabetest.com site, and then any staff who has completed their recertification training here also. So there's some history with TABE. It's been around for quite a while. There's links in the session too, just to kind of give you a visual of the history, but TABE 1 and 2 was approved in 1967. 3 and 4 was approved in 74 and 75. 5 and 6 came out in 1983. 7 and 8 was approved by the NRS in 1994. And that's the first TABE series that I learned about when I started working in Adult Basic Ed. TABE 9 and 10 came out when the GED test changed back in 2002. TABE Online was launched in 2006. And then TABE 11 and 12, which is what we're currently using, was approved in 2017. And that test is currently approved through September of 2024. And TABE 13, 14, the field testing continued through the end of August, but they submitted it to the NRS for hopeful approval just this last October. In years past, when a NRS approved test has a federal approval end date mid-year, the pattern has been to allow local programs and states to use that test until the end of a federal year, which would be June 30th. But just continue watching any information that you receive from MDE regarding any extension on the current end date of TABE 11 and 12. So who should be given 11-12's testing? Learners who are enrolling into adult ed programs that are funded by WIA, which Adult Basic Ed is part of. Clients interested in workforce centers, specialized training offerings to determine whether or not they're eligible. A student who's interested in earning their high school equivalency can take TABE. There are colleges that use TABE to help determine whether or not people are eligible for specific college courses. And then students who are English language learners who get above a 236 on a CASAS Life and Work reading test, and clients who are housed in corrections locations for program placement. There's some other tools that, excuse me, there's other tools from DRC that they've created. They're not approved for NRS reporting here in Minnesota, but they're available. There's a TABE writing test that can be used with GED prep learners that got released in 2021. Again, not NRS approved, and it's only available with computer-based testing. And then there's a test called a Class E test that was released in 2007, and the intention of that is to use with ELL learners. And DRC planned to resubmit that new version of the Class E this fall, but we've heard no updates since then. But so if you hear the term Class E, which I actually just heard again today because someone came from Wisconsin, that is what the Class E test is. Okay, remember this site. There's tons of resources out here. If you have never gone to this site, please feel free to use it. tabetest.com, tons of material out there. So TABE 11-12 is approved in 3 different subject areas. It's approved in reading, language, and math, all of them. Each level of TABE is designed to measure a different grade level content range. There are 5 different levels in reading, in language, and in math. The L level is called the literacy level, and that covers up to almost 2nd grade range. That's what the content is designed around. The E level is designed to cover from 2nd grade to 3.9 grade equivalent. The M level is designed to cover 4th through almost 6th grade. The D level has got a little wider spread, and that is designed to cover from 6th grade to 9th grade. And then the advanced level, or the A level, is designed to cover from 9th all the way to 12.9 and higher. So what do we know about TABE assessments? We know that they're designed to measure academic skills in context of common life and work scenarios. They can either be administered to a group or it can be done individually. It's practical to be using for large or for small groups. They do have sample test items for test preparation available at no extra cost on the tabetest.com site. If you use paper or pencil, TABE testing, more cost effective, but if you choose to go the online route, which is computer delivered through the Insight platform is what it's called, it improves quality of assessment. It can reduce staff time, relatively affordable. It's about $3 to $4 per test per subject. And an effective spring of 2022, DRC, which is Data Recognition Corporation, which is the publisher of TABE, notified programs that any online testing purchases that were made will expire 1 year after the date of purchase. So if your program is considering delivering TABE online, you do need to take into consideration your annual usage for testing. The state of Minnesota, through the grants, had some additional funding, and there were online tests purchased for TABE that are sitting in the state account. If your agency is interested in either adding to your account administrations or in starting TABE online or trying a pilot, please contact either myself or Marty Olson, and we'll explain what your next steps may be. All right, so earlier I said TABE's a standardized test. All of TABE's are standardized tests. And what does it mean to be standardized? Standardized really means that the test is always going to be administered and scored in the same way, whether it is in Minneapolis or Moorhead or in War Road. We all need to be using this test the same way. So the proper timing is key. There are proctoring scripts that should be read. We can assist students with demographic information as they're completing information in the system and on the answer sheets. No one is supposed to be reviewing test questions before beginning a test session. There's practice questions in both paper, pencil, and computer-based versions, but test questions are standardized. If they're not practice questions, you shouldn't be reviewing them with the learners. Students cannot use cell phones, translators, smartwatches, dictionaries, whatsoever while taking a test. And you shouldn't allow breaks in the middle of a testing session. Breaks can be allowed with both reading and the math for TABE because there's 2 parts, but they should not be taking a break in the middle of a testing session whatsoever. So questions should not be reviewed after someone completes testing whatsoever either. There's many times students asked which question items they got wrong, but we're not allowed to be telling them and sharing that with them. But there's diagnostics that, excuse me, are available in either the paper pencil version from DRC. There's also diagnostics from the Northwest Service Cooperative program that they developed and they shared, and I'll cover that a little bit later. And there are computer-based diagnostics that can be generated if you're completing any TABE online testing for individual students. So based on when TABE 11-12 initially got approved in 2017, there have been several updates to the maximum allowable testing time for each different subject, and as well as for the locator. And so if you have booklets and test administration manuals that were ordered when this test was originally approved at your agency, please make sure that you have this most updated document and you're using the maximum allowable times, because they're much shorter than what the original amounts were. So the last time that this was updated was in July 19th of 2019. This is in the materials section that I shared also. So just make sure you're using the proper timing for the locator and for any subject or subjects that you're delivering when testing. Maximum for reading parts 1 and 2 are 50 minutes each. If you look at the math times based on the testing level that is getting delivered, the times are slightly different for parts 1 and parts 2 based on the testing level that's getting administered. And for the reading locator, the maximum allowable is 35 minutes. The language locator is 20 minutes. And then again, there are 2 parts to the math locators, and they're each allowed 10 minutes. So even though you know you have this maximum allowable time, TABE provided information in a past webinar that provided information on what the average length of time it was taking for people to complete tests. So the maximum allowable time says for reading tests, 100 minutes, but the average length of time that it's taking people to complete the entire parts 1 and parts 2 of the reading test is 75 to 80 minutes. However, when you're designing a staff position for proctoring testing with TABE, you need to make sure that staffing is built around what the maximum allowable time is for the locators on the reading test, the locators on the language test, and the locators on the math test themselves. What our program has found with the volumes of testing that we have done is that when English is not the first language, testers tend to take the maximum allowable time for each individual test. All right, if your agency is doing paper pencil testing, these are things that need to be taken into consideration for the proctor and for the learner themselves. Each examinee needs, or each examiner needs the test directions. They need test booklets. They need answer keys. Every tester needs a test book, or potentially a test book, like more than one. And I say that because depending on what your site and agency practices are during enrollment, if you're testing in more than one subject area, many learners do not test into the same TABE level test if multiple subjects are being administered. So just take that into consideration. There are answer documents that can be purchased from DRC. And if you do not want to pay the extra cost for the answer documents, there are agency created answer sheets that multiple agencies here in Minnesota have shared, and those are posted out on the mnabeassessment.com site. So we appreciate different agencies sharing those with Marty and I to share with you. Additional materials that you need for paper pencil testing. Obviously, the students need pencils. They can have scratch paper, but only for math. They will need rulers if they're taking the level E test for math, and that's only for Form 12. Protractors need to be made available if they're using an M-level math test. Excuse me. And then a basic 4-function calculator can be used for math, and that only shows up, and they're only able to use it on part 2 of the math test itself. Scientific calculators can be used for the math for part 2 again, and those are only for the D and the A-level test. In the materials handout, there's actually a handout with different scientific calculators that are allowed to be used with the paper pencil testing. Basic 4-function calculators can be purchased at the dollar store in Walmart because that's what our local program did. All right, TABE has a service called Scanning and Scoring, and it runs through the DRC Insight platform. With the previous version of TABE of 910, there used to be a software called TestMate, and it was a very highly, it cost a lot. I believe it was between $3,000 and $4,000. And then it required programs to purchase answer sheets and maintain a scanner and so forth. So it wasn't very widely used. I didn't know any programs using it in Minnesota whatsoever. But when they updated to 1112, they now provide this service where if you purchase a scanner locally and you purchase the DRC answer sheets and you're doing paper and pencil testing, you can scan paper pencil testing and it'll all be uploaded to the TABE online site. And it'll therefore produce diagnostics for learners by using that service. There is one program here in Minnesota that currently uses that. They do not use TABE online. They just scan and upload all of their testing, and the program is out of Hopkins. So there is a wonderful document that is in your materials handout, and it's a PDF designed by TABE. Actually just had to share this morning, which was very interesting, with a program who asked about what's the best, what's a good scoring practice for post testing? What level of testing should I be using? So when searching for scaled scores on the score guide, this document, users may notice a plus or minus sign next to a scaled score if you've seen a scaled score document already. The plus and the minus scores that are in the score guide show whether the scaled score is outside of the content range of how the test was designed. When the scaled score is assigned and that falls in the plus or the minus range, the score is still valid. But if you're using that plus or minus score for pre-testing, you should consider using the next higher level test on a post test if that pre-test score falls into the plus range. The reason for that is because a learner is not going to make a level gain if they can't get a higher scale score in that test and that subject. And just, you know, if you have any questions about how this works, with TABE 1112, there's scores when you get a number correct that may not produce a scaled score. And if that is the case, it is going to show up either as an NA or an O/R in the score guide. For example, if a student only got 7 correct on a test in a subject, and it doesn't produce a scaled score, you should consider giving them the test lower than they just took to provide you some additional information before you place that student into class. So if you're using the test directions from TABE 11 and 12 and you're hand scoring items, you need to understand there is a learning curve with the answer key for TABE 11 and 12. Data Recognition Corporation actually embedded field testing questions to take into consideration for future test development, but it made it difficult for local programs that were doing hand scoring to make sure they excluded those items when they're looking at the final scaled score. So the chart that you're looking at now shows a level E reading test, and it is the Form 11. There are 2-part questions that are in the TABE 11 and 12 series. And the way that the scoring works for a 2-part question is if an individual gets both items correct, so they get part A and part B correct, they'll get 2 points total for that question. If they only get 1 correct and they get A correct, but they get B wrong, they will only get 1 point for that question. If they get incorrect items on both A and B, or they only get B correct, they're not gonna get any points for that individual question, so. I don't think that there's arrows embedded. There is not. Just a second. Yes, there is. Okay. So just take into consideration field test questions do not count in a total score. All right. Talked about this briefly earlier. If you want if you want agency created answer sheets, these answer sheets were created by Kirsten Fugelseth from Northwest Service Co-op. You can find those templates out at the www.mnabeassessment.com site. And then if you want the answer keys that were created for that agency, please email those from Marty Olson. Those answer keys are not posted online, and nor should they be. So when you're using the locator and you're scoring the locator and you're assigning the specific test, this is a grid that is in the test administration manual to show how the locator works. Locators are actually best practice. You don't want to ever assume that you know the right level of a test that anyone has taken in any given subject. But the way that the locator is designed, it shows that when a student takes locator, and the locators are designed to cover all 12 grade ranges in a specific subject area. So it can't be used to place somebody into a class, but it can be used to diagnose which test level that they need in any given subject. So if a student is taking a reading test and they get between 6 and 11 correct, they would get a level M test. That's the guidance that it uses. Whenever a student scores less than 6 on a locator in any given subject, there's the L level test that can be administered, but you should use the previous information on an examinee's performance to determine the appropriate level of pretest that they need. So we're going to do a little pop quiz. Hopefully everybody knows how to use a locator and uses the locators. So Sandra got 10 correct on a reading test. Which pretest should she be administered in reading? If you could put that in the chat for me. Got a couple M's. Yep, and M is the correct answer. Thank you. Okay, so Jamal got 6 correct on his math, and oh my goodness, I just gave you the answer, so that one is M too. Okay, so Nellie got 8 correct, and she was taking a language test. Which pretest should she be taking? I got M again, yes. Okay, now we're gonna kick it up a notch. Richard got 12 correct on his reading test. Which pretest should he be taking? Should take a D, correct. Awesome. Andrea got 11 on her language test. Which pretest should she get? Yep, we got another D. Now we have Molly, and Molly got 13 correct on her math test. Which pretest should she take in math? She should take an A. And I'll share just a little bit. When our agency is delivering testing, we're seeing people take the A-level tests who have super recent drops from high school. Not super common for our program to be seeing A-level tests taken. Generally what we're seeing is D's and M's. We do find that the data is kind of showing us if individuals have been out of school for 8 to 15 years, their reading level test and their math level test vary by at least 1 level. So typically we're seeing D level reading, M level math, see it quite often. All right. So we talk about, can we use scores that are invalid? TABE doesn't have any scores that fall in the invalid range, which is great. But there are results that do not provide a scaled score. And when that happens, it's because they didn't get enough correct in order for the score guide to provide a scaled score. And again, I said this earlier, but it's either going to produce an NA or an OR in levels M, D, and A. However, in level E, there are scaled scores that will be populated based on 1 correct all the way up to 47 correct, just so that staff are aware of that. However, when a number correct is excuse me, is too high, scaled score is going to have a plus sign behind it, but then the scaled score will not increase in that test level. Whenever a test score falls into the high or low range, it's just always wise to retest on a pretest. All right, so here's a picture of the score guide. Good information. This is showing the reading level M score guide. It shows the form 11 as well as the 12. You can see from the first column, it says the raw score. The raw score is the number correct on that test. You can see that if the student or a tester took a form 11, they would need to get at least 8 correct in order to produce the 442 scaled score. And you can also see that with the form 12, they would need to get at least 8 correct on either of those versions of that test. Please keep in mind that even if you have a negative or a plus sign after a scaled score, those scores can still be recorded into SID. And bonus, for those of you who may have been here for many years, both tables and charts for 11 and 12 are on the same page, same chart. That's big, because I remember huge manuals in years past from different versions of TABE that was not the case. Something nice about this as well is you can see if someone took the form 11 and they got 11 correct on the form 11, then they took the form 12 after they had enough hours to protest. You can see that their scaled score does increase by 5 points and it goes to a 447. All right. This visual is on the high end of the reading level M scaled score chart. It shows again form 11 and form 12. If you have an individual who's getting a 575 and got 39 correct on their pretest, it's possible to record that score in SID, but they are never going to get an education function level gain if you keep them in the form 11 test. So you should consider moving them to a D level test with the post testing that's done, because they're never going to make a gain. But those scale scores again can be recorded in SID, and again, they're all on the same chart. All right, where are we at for time?
Oh, Linda, you have 10 minutes.
10 minutes. Okay. How many slides do I have left to cover? So, table
Linda,
12 reading.
Linda, sorry to interrupt you. I hope that the remote control is working for you. Okay. Like when I try to open or close the chat box, I think it's advancing the slides sometimes.
Okay.
So I'm doing my best to not touch anything.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. I'm going to go back one slide. Table 11 and 12, if it'll go back for me. Doesn't seem to be going back, for goodness sakes. I think it's advancing. Goodness, sorry. Okay. The table 11-12 reading test has 47 items at each level. You can see on this chart that shows how many reading passages are in each level test. Each learner has approximately 3 minutes per question. All of them are aligned to the content standards, and all of them cover lots of broad range of disciplines. And If you choose to, you can do parts 1 and parts 2 for reading at different times. I wouldn't encourage it because you need both parts 1 and parts 2 in order to produce a scaled score. But if there's test fatigue and if a learner promises to come back or you give them a break in between, yeah, just do what you have to do in order to get both parts 1 and parts 2 taken. This grid shows all of the information that was built into SID. It shows the reading, the math, and the language range for each test level, for each NRS subject. Don't feel that you ever need to memorize these because they're all different, but I would highly encourage putting this on the front of your monitor if you're a data person and you want to see if someone's close to gaining a level in a specific subject in your local programs. So years ago when 11-12 was approved, there were grade ranges that were provided on past versions of TABE. However, they didn't produce a grade equivalent document right away when it got approved, but they did provide us with information for grade ranges after the fact. However, after several years, they didn't feel that DRC didn't feel that those were totally accurate. And so in 2022, they started working at coming up with a newer version of the grade equivalents associated with a scaled score range. So this next chart shows information that was shared just this last July of estimated grade level changes and ranges. However, these numbers are not finalized by any means. So I'm just sharing a screenshot of what was provided from a webinar that they delivered in 2023. There are tons and tons of resources out on the tabetest.com site, including blueprints for every single test and every single level and every single subject. If you haven't already and are not familiar with the blueprints for any of the TABE tests that you're using at your local programs, go out to the tabetest.gov site and look at the blueprints. They break the test down to show you the high amounts of information and the structure of what is on each test. They're super helpful to know how to target your instruction. And it gives a breakdown of the content standards that are covered in the specific level of test and subject as well. Okay. TABE Online, if you wanted to do diagnostics and you are using TABE Online, there's diagnostic tools that can help you drill down and look at proficiency, partial proficiency, and non-proficiency in a specific test and level and subject. Again, to help you target instruction. You cannot produce these diagnostics as a group, but you can pull them for individuals. So if you're interested in doing that and you're delivering TABE Online, talk to whoever at your agency can help you understand how to access these reports. If you wanted to do a hand scoring diagnostic report and you're doing paper pencil testing, or there's some other resources that Northwest Service Cooperative provided and did this very early on when 11 and 12 got approved, but they're checklists that help you understand the standards that are being taught in specific levels and subjects with both math and with English. The one that's shown up here on the screen is the one for math that was designed by Corinne Hansen from Northwest Service Cooperative, but they can help you use them to check off the skills as a student master each skills. The next screen here is the one that was designed by Laura Burke from, again, Northwest Service Cooperative. Can't thank that program enough for sharing great ideas like that, but any of these can be downloaded on the mnabeassessment.com site under the TABE section. So talk about post-testing. When should we be post-testing? You can test students after they have 40 hours of attendance recorded in SID in any given subject and series. But then how do we know what post-test to give? If a pre-test score in the low to mid range of the test level and subject, you should use the opposite form of the same level and same subject. But if the pre-test score was in the upper range of the level, check and make sure that the learner can get a gain in that same level. And if they can, then administer the opposite form of the same level. And if there's no possibility of them earning a level gain in that level because they have a plus sign after their scaled score, move up to the next test level for a post test. So if you're interested in purchasing tests, there's a cost breakdown of the paper pencil testing. There's also a cost breakdown of TABE Online. If you're interested and haven't started using TABE Online yet, please contact Marty or I. There are tests sitting in the MDE account that were purchased through the supplemental service grant because there were excess funds, but we still have them in there. So we just need to keep in mind annual usage for local programs when adding those to agency accounts. If you're a new user and you wanted to purchase them, the minimum order is $1,500 to be a new customer, and then $500 is the minimum if you're an existing TABE Online customer. So what do I do if I find old 7 and 8s and 9 10s, which we have found? You need to destroy them, shred them, confidential recycling. Shouldn't be using them for instructional purposes whatsoever. And then what do we need to know about level gains? We all need to know that it's our role. If we're a support staff or a teacher, it's our responsibility to understand what level gains are for your class, for your site, for your agency, for your entire program, because it's all ABE staff are working towards submitting this information for the state as a whole, so that that information that's submitted to the federal government, that we look good, that we have our ducks in a row, that we're doing the things right to continue get funding from the federal government. So consider your program level gains, get some consistent practices in place for new students, for returning students. Attempt to test in more than one subject during enrollment. As a data person, we strongly encourage that across the board. If you're able to test in reading and math and language, great. You know, if you break it up into several days of testing, you know, just think about the type of programming that you're offering, and then set up regular routine post-testing processes at your sites so that you're testing regularly. Look at the amount of classes you're holding each week, and then kind of build your post-testing routines around that. If your classes are meeting 20 hours a week, it's very feasible to be testing once monthly during class time. Program targets, I'm going to not share a ton on this, but Brad gave a wonderful description of this during today's opening session and gave a really good breakdown. These numbers changed after COVID of the expectations, but the target for us to all be trying to achieve for measurable skill gains this year is 28%. So the other two items that I'm going to share were documents that were developed by Marty, and I believe they're shared on the MNABE website also. It gives you a good breakdown and a great visual for the content standards, the test levels, the NRS levels. And this compares TABE 11 and 12 to CASAS goals. This chart that I have here is the reading test information. The next slide is the math level information. I'll turn my screen on. You can see that I have these taped up behind me on my wall because I'm referring to them pretty regularly. So, and my timer just went off, so I need to make sure that we're covered here. We like to go over this, but we don't have time today. But these are things that to consider of when to use TABE tests, when to use CASAS Life and Work, and so forth. We do go over those during training just to kind of get some practice. But if you want the answers for them, you know, let me know later or email me later and we can provide that information. So if you haven't already done so, I need you to put your full name in the chat. I need to provide the information from the agency that you're working with, your current role, and your email address, because we need to verify that you were here today and that you attended this training. We do get asked for this 6 months, a year, 2 years after the fact, and we need to have that information documented somewhere. If you need chats or if you need CEUs for today, please put your name in the chat and we'll make sure that we get a CEU for you. If you attended today's training, talk to your local data manager and make sure that they record that you attended today's training in your SID staff history. And if you have any additional questions, please email me because I'm going to jump back into another session here shortly. That's going to cover more updates on testing. And thank you for attending today and enjoy the rest of your conference.
One question, Linda.
Yes.
You mentioned a survey or research that showed that ELL takers, test takers took the full amount of time. Is that anything that you can share, or was that just
It's just
something that
insight that has been shared like locally with delivering it here at Metro North, as well as like Minneapolis and like programs that do large volume of testing.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.